Step into the captivating world of the Behind the Curtain podcast, where your dynamic hosts, John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, bring together a wealth of 60 years of combined experience in healthcare and manufacturing. Join us every week as we delve into intriguing topics, weaving unscripted conversations that promise to take you on an unpredictable and enlightening journey. Gain valuable insights for your continuous improvement adventure as we navigate uncharted territories with enthusiasm and expertise. Welcome to a podcast that goes beyond the ordinary, unraveling the mysteries behind the curtain of knowledge.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Curtain. My name is Mohamed Saleh, and with me is John Dyer. And today our focus is going to continue on open communication as it relates to silos. And so I think many of us, John, have experienced that there tends to be a lack of communication or open communication between departments. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, I wrote an article for Industry Week several years ago and hit upon some of these same points. But they're as true today as they were back when I wrote the article. So really, it boils down to, I think, three major reasons silos form. So let's focus on that first, and then we can discuss maybe how to start knocking them down. The first reason for silos being formed is competition. And this is competition between the departmental leaders or the business leaders. They all know that the hierarchical pyramid gets narrower and narrower as you go further up the ladder. And so there might be only one or two spots available for, say, 10 directors. And they know they're all competing for that spot, for that promotion sometime in the future. So there's two ways to be recognized, right, for a potential promotion. Either lift yourself up, by making yourself look good, your department look good, your numbers look good, your metrics look good, or by tearing down all of your peers, right? Pointing out their faults. Oh, look at how bad that department is. Look at, those folks over there don't know what they're doing. And clearly they're the ones responsible for all of our problems around here.
Yeah.
And of course, then those department leaders have to reciprocate, right? I mean, you can't have your department disparaged and not feel like you can retaliate in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And so you end up with these departmental wars because the leaders are all trying to, make themselves look good. And what's fascinating about that is when that does happen, the leaders of companies tend to then go to the outside to fill those higher positions. It's like, I don't want to promote any of these people, right? So it's self-destruction and mutual destruction across all. So that's one of the primary reasons for silos to being formed.
Yeah.
The second one is the blame game. And we've all been there, right? We've all been there in a hastily called meeting right after a major problem has just occurred, right? It could be a significant quality issue that results in maybe some sort of a recall or maybe a safety issue where someone might have gotten hurt. Some major catastrophe happens, and you then get called into the what happened meeting, right? Mm-hmm. And that tends to be, the head of the the head of the business and then all the departmental leaders. And then they usually bring, one or two lieutenants with them. And the entire meeting is all about how to deflect blame, right? Yeah, this wasn't our fault. We got bad parts from purchasing, so you need to point the finger at them. Uh-huh. Oh, no, it wasn't our fault. Engineering gave us bad drawings with bad, specifications on them. So you need to go, point the finger at engineering. And, oh, no, it wasn't our fault. The drawings were right, and manufacturing just didn't make the parts correctly. So now you're in this circular firing squad.
Yeah.
Um, and I tell you, those meetings tend to be very brutal. I mean, just brutal. Your whole goal is to walk out with your job intact and your dignity intact.
Yeah.
Because they can get, I mean, I've been through some really, really brutal meetings like that,
Yeah.
especially if the culture is built still on the old style fear and blame and control. Um, the third reason for silos to form is how the departments are being measured, right? The management by objectives. What are the goals and objectives for each of those departments? And if there's not a well understood common vision of where the company is going in the future, then the departmental goals might be set that and they're not aligned. They're not aligned to a specific direction that the company is going. They're just basically, maybe they're based on historical metrics. Maybe they're based on just, throwing darts against a dart board on the wall. What's your goal going to be today? Well, I think we need to have you focus on safety, or I think we need to have you focus on cost reduction. And if these objectives don't align
Mm-hmm.
with each other, then you could have departments that are fighting against each other.
Yeah.
I mean, a real good example of that is, let's say purchasing is being told that their objective for the year is to get the lowest price possible for parts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you don't include any metrics on quality, delivery, those kinds of things, then yeah, I can get the lowest price by going to a very bad supplier, subpar supplier, without any focus on how they perform,
Yeah.
because that's not part of my metrics. Well, now here in manufacturing, let's say my metrics are to, you know, on-time delivery, productivity, cost reductions, quality. And now all of a sudden I'm getting all these substandard parts. Well, I can't meet the quality objectives. I can't meet the on-time delivery objectives. So now I have to start, lobbing grenades over into the purchasing department and say, hey, you guys are killing us over here. And again, it may not be anything that they're doing. It's just that they're
It's a
meeting
dysfunctional
the
measure.
objectives that were set.
Yeah.
And so then you again get these huge silo walls that start to form between those departments. Because and then on the other side, when manufacturing does stumble and aren't able to meet their customers' needs, now you have the sales group that have to go out and talk to the customers and explain why the orders are late.
Yeah.
And they, of course, have to start pointing fingers at manufacturing. Yeah, our manufacturing group let us down this time, and I don't know what's going on over there, but we'll clean it up someday. And then walls form around manufacturing and sales. So yeah, if there's not a common vision and the goals and objectives aren't aligned, you can get chaos.
When you talk about, just to kind of bring us back to all three of them, when you talk about internal competition and you talk about fear of blame, and you talk about dysfunctional measures and how people get measured, um, that brings us back to some key principles that are flawed in that design. And so when we had talked in a few episodes ago around team over self, or self over team. Obviously, that's a self over team environment. And so the systems are designed to support that design principle. And so the behaviors that we're witnessing from a fear-based or a vulnerability-based or a support base are clearly in support of that design principle. And to add to that too is we talked about also team dynamics and having a shared mental model. And obviously, there isn't in this scenario a shared mental model, which ultimately hinders people's ability to want to speak up and talk to one another. It almost feels intentional, even though when you live it, it doesn't feel intentional. But why would I disclose my weaknesses and communicate my mistakes to people when I'm going to just get, reprimanded for it? That's a really good point.
Right. And remember, the first step for making improvement happen is to admit that you have a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if the fear is that if I admit that I have a problem, then that's going to somehow diminish me in the eyes of my bosses, then that takes me out of the running for future promotional opportunities.
Yeah.
So why admit that I have these problems? Instead, I'll just sweep them under the rug, hide them. Hopefully, I can get out of this job before they are exposed or cause some major catastrophe. That's what goes through a lot of people's minds.
It's fascinating when we look at, in our last episode, we talked about open communication through the tiered huddles to some degree, and how one of the major symptoms that we see is fear, vulnerability, and a lack of trust. It sounds like almost like also horizontally, it's the exact same symptoms. Fear, vulnerability, and a lack of trust, or a lack of vulnerability. And so I think, what's your thoughts about, do you feel like the same countermeasures apply in both directions?
To a certain degree. So yeah, let's talk about, how do we knock down some of these siloed walls, or how do we change that? First is, like I said already, that do we have a common vision of where we're headed, and are all the departments pulling in the same direction?
Yeah.
So if our focus is on excellence and in the eyes of the customer, let's say, well, now everything needs to be targeted to how do we have the best quality, the best throughput, the best, shortest lead times, best on-time delivery, those kind of things. And how can all the various departments work together to make that happen? Recognizing that's not just a manufacturing thing, right? So can engineering, as an example, help to redesign some of the parts to make them easier to go together, or to eliminate a dozen screws, or a dozen different part numbers? So what can engineering do to help manufacturing? What can purchasing do to help? What can sales do to help get the customer's needs and specifications more better understood
Yeah.
by the manufacturing folks? So again, it's how to everybody work in concert with each other, and we either win as a team or we lose as a team, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's first. Second is better understanding of what the various departments do. I've done many process mapping sessions through my career, probably over 100 facilitated. And some of my favorite process mapping sessions are ones that involve multiple departments.
Mm-hmm.
And especially where handoffs occur, right? Because where things get handed off from one group to another, that's the highest potential problem can occur. So it's fascinating to me when you do a process map and it goes from one department, gets handed off to another department, and then we do their process map. And I've heard this over and over again. Wow, I had no idea that your process was so screwed up, over in your department. I now I understand why you're always late with stuff. I thought it was just because you were a bunch of lazy, no good people over there. But it's clear now that, no one could be successful given how horrible your process is.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it becomes changes from one of adversary to one of sympathy almost. Okay, now I get it. Now I understand. What can we do now? What can we do to work together to fix this? Even if that means maybe I need to do something a little more difficult in order to make your process run smoother, which will then in turn help us both.
Hmm.
Having those kind of conversations is very powerful.
Yeah.
Um, so again, just the sharing of knowledge, sharing of information, and getting people to recognize that no, it's not, we're not doing it intentionally.
Hmm.
We're not screwing up on purpose. It's because of the way the process is designed.
Yeah, and I love what you just highlighted because by bringing all these people together, I don't think sometimes people appreciate the power of like a Kaizen or a value stream mapping or a process mapping of that, because what you do is you bring awareness to upstream and downstream processes. And what happens in that process is that people have an appreciation or a shared mental model on the true purpose behind what we're all trying to go after. And then what ends up happening is you also find people saying, well, you don't need to do that step because it's redundant to what we do, or, what could we do to make your life easier so that you don't have to do all these things, right? I was working in a company where after they were done with their part, they would bag it, and then the other department would have to unbag it, and that's just how they thought it had to be, and we were doing an event around how to make the bagging process more efficient. Well, the other department didn't even want you to bag. It was a frustrating effort for them to have to keep detrashing it and unbagging it. And so by bringing people together, you realize also that how could we support one another, and then it goes from a competitive environment like you had said before to more of a team environment. And organizations that are very focused on hitting a number sometimes lose sight that they were never trained on being a team. They were trained on effective task. So, there's uh, teams tasks and teamwork. And I think when you look at team efficiency, it's not about the individual tasks. We could all excel in our individual tasks, but how are we working collectively as a team? And I think that might be one way to reduce broken communication between the departments.
Now, I tell you, one word of warning.
Yeah.
Sometimes when we're making improvements to our part of the process,
Hmm.
it can actually cause um, issues for the upstream or downstream parts of the process,
Yeah,
which could actually then lead to silos being formed. So,
absolutely.
you sit there and go, okay, we're trying to do the right thing. We're going to do lean. We're going to do continuous improvement. We're going to do teams. And, oh, okay, we've just made this really great improvement. Oh, my goodness. Our part of the process is now 20% more efficient. Oh, man, we're knocking it out of the ballpark.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, people upstream or downstream are like, what's going on?
Hmm.
I'll give you a quick example. I wrote about this in my article that the engineering group in one particular company came up with an amazing process improvement, right? So they sold lots of parts that were the same design, just different dimensions, right?
Hmm.
So what they were doing is every time they would design a part, then they would have to come up with unique drawings for all of the additional parts that scaled higher, bigger and bigger and bigger, right?
Hmm.
Um, so in what they came up with for a process improvement was to, instead of having to hand do these additional drawings, is just basically have the computer system automatically scale all the dimensions bigger from that original part. Well, think about it, right? Let's say you have a 1 inch hole, and the next biggest part is 8% bigger. Well, the computer system then would just scale all the dimensions up by 8%. So now instead of a 1 inch hole, you have a 1.08 inch hole. Well, everybody in manufacturing knows that that's not a common cutting dimension. It's not, you don't go out and buy a cutting tool that's 1.08 inches, right?
Yeah.
It's just, that's just not a common thing. So engineering made this really great improvement to their process, which accelerated the ability for them to pump out drawings, but it brought manufacturing to their knees.
Yeah.
because they were no longer dealing with common dimensions.
Yeah.
And and manufacturing didn't know what the heck was going on. I mean, they didn't know that engineering had done this. All they knew was all of a sudden they were getting these really odd dimensions, and they were being expected to make the parts to those dimensions, meeting all the quality standards. And it just absolutely, killed them.
Yeah.
So there's a case where you got to be careful. And that's why having cross-functional teams is critically important.
Yeah.
I highly recommend that every Kaizen event, every team that you form have, a standard issue, someone that represents the supplier of that process, someone that represents the internal or external customer of that process, someone who represents feeder processes like IT or engineering, with data. So that way you're not sub-optimizing.
Yeah.
You're not making improvements to one part of the process at the detriment of everyone else.
Yeah, because and that'll just bring us back into the loop of no open communication that's happening between them, and we just go back to square one. Then fear starts and blame starts. Then we're internally competing, and we're back to square one again. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff is pretty obvious once you see it.
Yeah.
Stopping it though is, boy, it's a whole nother thing. It's so much easier to blame others and and those kind of things instead of working together as a team.
Yeah. So if your organization, as we come to a close, doesn't have that shared purpose or that shared mental model, I really don't see how you could knock down silos unless you could bring a team together so that they could see what each other's do at a horizontal scale. And I love what you said, having the customer, the supplier, the feeder, all represented together so that if there's any open communication issues, they could kind of understand each other's reality and have a shared purpose. All right.
Let me add just one more quick thing. Another way to address it can be the organizational structure, and that's something we can get into at a future podcast. But not everything has to be departmental formed.
Correct.
So that's another thing to consider. But all right, we'll pick that up again in a future podcast. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, take care, everyone.
As we draw the curtains on another fascinating episode, we wanted to express our gratitude for joining us on this enlightening journey. If you're hungry for more captivating and thought-provoking discussions with John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, hit that subscribe button to ensure you don't miss a beat. Until next week, keep exploring, stay inquisitive, and stay inspired. See you on the next Behind the Curtain adventure.